Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. While we're waiting for people to trickle in, go ahead and take this time to adjust your names. So adjust your pronouns if you'd like to, and make sure that your name reflects what you'd like to be referred to throughout this engagement. And if you wouldn't mind going in the chat, let us know who you are, and what brings you here today, and maybe something that brings you joy. Let's start this conversation out with some joyful notes. Maybe we'll start by introducing ourselves, and attendees, if you're interested and inclined, please share your name in the chat and what brings you here today. My name is Joya Mukherjee. I work with the Pulitzer Center, and today I'm going to be a facilitator. I'd love to pass this to Hannah.
Thank you, Joya, and thank you all so much for being here. My name is Hannah, they, them pronouns, and I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. today. And something that's been bringing me joy lately are just all of the fabulous fall colors around me. I feel like I haven't gotten a great deal of them in previous years, so I'm very excited about it this time around. Can I pass it to Ray?
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Chicago's Southwest Side. I teach at a high school near Midway Airport, if you know the city. I'm happy to be here and share a little bit about some of the work that we've done here in the high school to amplify student voice and to help students tell their stories. I think one of the things that's been bringing me joy lately is that the debate team is still up and running. We competed at our tournament last weekend, and we have 18 students who are talking about different ways to solve economic inequality through Chicago debates. And so that's always a good experience to watch young people use their voices. So I'm happy to be here and share student work and learn a little bit about what other people are doing as well.
Let's hear from our Wisconsin team, who are graciously here supporting us and making this event possible. Would you come off mute and share your name and maybe something that brings you joy as well?
Hello, I'm Chanad Chiklosh. I'm the Associate Director of the Institute for Regional and International Studies. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending. One thing that does bring me joy is this event. So thank you all.
Hi, I'm Essie Lenchner with the same institute, Iris and NRC, and what brings me joy is talking to teachers at conferences. I just attended the WAFLD conference here in Wisconsin for language educators, and it was a really energizing experience.
Thank you so much, Essie. We're so glad to be here with you today. And I'm seeing so many wonderful things in the chat. Heather, custard brings you joy. Me too. And I haven't had custard in a while. Omar, we're so glad to have you here. Tammy says that she's here enjoying crochet and excited to strengthen their journalism skills. Tammy, we're very glad you're here. Magda works with ELL students in Madison. We're so glad that you're here. And so many other people in the chat. We're very grateful for you, and please continue to engage in the chat. So let's go ahead and move forward and talk about Zoom meetings. I'm sure that you're all very familiar with the Zoom format, but we'd like to share just some ways to engage today. So we have questions for you today. And when you want to respond to questions, let's use the chat for now. And if the person asking you a question prompts you to raise a digital hand, go ahead and use that feature. But for today, let's use the chat for the first portion of this event. You could also use the chat to share your thoughts and ideas and other resources with other participants. We find that we attract educators that have so much to offer. So if you have a connection or you have a resource you want to share, please, we're inviting you to do that. If you have a question at any point, go ahead and throw that in the chat, or just raise a hand and let us know. There'll be maybe some time at the very end to answer questions, but one of the Pulitzer Center staff is really going to be looking at the chat throughout the event while the other person is presenting. So we'll be noticing what you're including, and that might be the best way to ask your questions. And you are welcome to use reactions to show your agreement and care for things. So that's another way for you to engage. So how are we going to spend our time together today? We'll start by talking really about the Pulitzer Center and how do we approach global media? What is our unique approach to that skill? Then we're going to talk about media literacy in action, approaches, and practices. Finally, we're going to hear from an amazing educator today that we've worked with for some time. His name is Ray Salazar, and such a treat for all of you. So I'm very excited that he's here. And then we'll end with some questions, a closing from the Pulitzer Center, where we're going to share some resources that you can use and take away into your classrooms, and of course, a survey. Some of the essential questions that are going to be driving our time together today is, why is journalism a useful tool for educators and students? How can media literacy skills help us as we navigate the news? And how can we use news and media literacy skills to practice global citizenship? So these are the questions that are really going to be driving our engagement today, and we hope that you have some answers to those in your head as you walk away. So let's talk a little bit about the Pulitzer Center, and we're actually in a very exciting time at the organization. We're going through a review of our vision and mission, and the mission that drives our organization. A previous incarnation of our mission statement really focused on spreading awareness of underreported stories or news stories that are just not getting the attention and coverage that they deserve. But after a series of new reporting initiatives and some deep work with teachers and students at both the K-12 and university level, we realized that journalism, especially journalism about communities and stories that are underreported, has the power to inspire deep change. Therefore, our new mission is just a step further than its previous incarnation. We champion the power of stories to make complex issues relevant and to inspire action. We support stories that go beyond the breaking news headlines to illuminate the systemic global issues that affect people and places around the world. These are just some of the issues that the Pulitzer Center focuses on. If you're noticing an issue that's resonating with you, go ahead and throw that in the chat, and we'll learn a little bit more about you and your interests. Let's go to the next slide, Hannah. In order to make these complex global issues feel relevant and inspire action, it's important that the stories we support and the models we offer for engaging with them can help audiences see how they can relate to those issues on a local or personal level. This flowchart illustrates how news and media literacy skills can be used to practice global citizenship, through which we expand our circle of concern and come to understand ourselves as connected to people and places around the world. Perhaps in reflecting on a news story, students will discover that they share an identity or a personal experience with one or more of the story subjects and can exercise their empathy for the emotions people in the story express. Or as they identify the global issues the story deals with, students can reflect on how their community is implicated. Maybe they're suffering from a similar problem themselves, even if it looks a little different in different places. Maybe there are policies or practices locally that are contributing to a global problem. Or maybe a student's community has information, power, or resources that could help to alleviate the issues elsewhere. Let's take a moment to generate some responses to this question in the chat. What can journalism do in your life? We'd love to hear a little bit from you about your responses to this question. What is the role of journalism, the utility of it? What can it do for your life? Tammy says it pretty candidly and best. It can help you learn. Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else want to contribute to this in the chat? To be in the know? Excellent, Omar. Yeah, to feel informed, right? Accountability, Danielle. Excellent. Carly says, it can help me understand what is going on in the world. Excellent. And make informed decisions. Protect my human rights by shining a light on threats and abuses. Heather, thank you for sharing that. John says, if done objectively, it is a great source of knowledge. Thank you, John. Keep these answers coming in the chat. I'm actually going to pass it to Hannah to talk a little bit about this question.
I'm really excited to see these answers coming in. The first ones that I saw here, to learn, to be informed, to be in the know, right? And this is actually a question that I've been asking students in classrooms over the last few months in some workshops that we run at the Pulitzer Center around taking action based on the news. And that is usually the first response that we come up with. And I also think that if we ask the room full of journalists and editors who work at the Pulitzer Center what the purpose of journalism in our lives is, that is the only thing that 100% of us would agree on. From there are so many different things that journalism can be and do in our lives and in the world. And I appreciate you sharing with us what it can mean to you at its best. So take a minute, scroll through the chat, see what your colleagues in the room are saying. This is kind of our ideal, right? The standard that we want to hold journalism to. I don't like to ask a question that I haven't come up with some responses to for myself. So I'm resonating with a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat. Some of the things that being informed about issues and taking that next step beyond just learning things, but also thinking about why it's important to learn in the first place, is that I find that really good journalism can help me interrupt stereotypes and my own biases. So when I'm learning about other places, other people that I may not be able to visit myself, that I may not know as deeply through my own experiences, journalism can give me a more nuanced picture of what's going on in the world. It helps me to see how I'm connected to people around the world, to build solidarity with other groups, and also know that I am not alone with my issues and other people don't have to be alone with theirs. It helps me to identify those root causes of problems affecting me and others so that I can start to think about solutions. And I saw a lot of people saying it might lead us to take informed action, which is exactly where we hope to go with our mission at Pulitzer. And of course, that means that we're informing our choices, right? Maybe we're seeing news that's really basic about natural disasters, public health crises, different issues that impact us on a very direct level that might tell us what precautions we need to take to keep ourselves and our people safe. It might impact who I'm voting for, what I buy or boycott, the kind of community work that I get involved in, and it can make a real difference in my personal life. So I'm excited to see some of these responses and how deeply folks in this room are thinking about journalism. And I think that it's a useful starting point for any media literacy work that we're doing, to think about what we hope journalism at its best can do, because these skills are really about giving us tools to navigate the media landscape. And so we need to know why that's an important thing to be able to do. And when we have those skills, what it's going to equip us for in our lives. We're also curious about what journalism can do beyond our individual lives when it's put into the world. So these are a few examples of pieces of impact that have come out of Pulitzer Center reporting projects in the past year or so. We can see how journalism can have impacts from university levels to the corporate world, to even large government and non-governmental organizations in terms of the policies that they choose and the practices that they implement to hopefully keep our most vulnerable communities, individuals, and people safe. It also means that students can take action and be inspired to do their own investigations and to change their practices in their personal lives based on what they learn, and that maybe it shapes our pedagogical and classroom practices as well. So what we're really excited to share with you today is how we get to this point of belief that people and communities who actively engage with systemic challenges will find solutions together when informed by these kinds of really useful stories. To do that, we believe that it's important to have more than just the story itself. There needs to be a longer tail. We need educators and we need outreach specialists. We need people working to figure out how we can help to make connections and break down barriers in terms of accessing and analyzing that flood of information that is around us. So on our K-12 education team in this larger journalism organization, our mission is to create programs and resources that cultivate a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public by connecting teachers and students with underreported global news stories and directly with the journalists who cover them. So you're going to hear more today about these kinds of resources that we have available to you. What we want for our workshop time is to dig into some of these practices, to dig into some of the concepts behind media literacy, and talk a little bit about how you can use these. But we also want you to walk away with actionable resources that you can take into your classrooms and your programs and use with students if you're ready to get started on that work today. So we're going to transition to thinking about how we navigate this landscape of information to get to that useful purpose of journalism, which can help us to take informed action, which can help us to make local connections to global issues, break down bias and stereotypes, and do all of these meaningful things. So all of you have signed up for a media literacy workshop today, which means I'm betting that you have some assumptions and ideas already about what media literacy looks like. Maybe many of you are already teaching this in your classrooms. So I would love to hear from you. What kinds of words, phrases, images come to mind when you think about media literacy? I'm just going to hold about 40 seconds for responses to come into the chat here before we take a look at a definition that I accidentally gave you a sneak peek of together. Of course, there are no wrong answers to this question. We're just doing some free association and thinking about the many different ways that media literacy can show up. You see discourse analysis, misinformation and combating it, critical thinking. Bunch of people coming in for critical thinking here. I love to see that. I also love investigating. Wonderful action word and also very related to journalism. Fact checking. Getting students to think critically about what they read, so text analysis too. Savion says, challenging your own beliefs critically. Interesting. Checking biases. Love that, John. And Karen, I see that access, analyze, evaluate, and create, which is a familiar definition that is one that we're going to look at together here. Please keep those coming. I want to really be expansive about what media literacy can look like and what it can mean. But media literacy, as defined by the National the National Association for Media Literacy Education, is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act on all forms of mass communication. So that includes journalism. It's also a bit of a broader field. And importantly, it starts with that kind of like accessing and analytical space, but it does lead to the kind of informed actions that we've already been talking about. Yes, keep these words coming. I'm just checking back. I'm connecting the dots. Oh, I love that as an idea and a definition for what media literacy could be, that it can help us connect the dots between politics and daily life or between so many different things. It makes me think about...
Oh, I'm so sorry, Hannah. What I love is deconstructing narratives by Hussein. I think that's such an, yes, I support that. It's such an interesting concept.
Beautiful. Yes. So there are a few different approaches to what media literacy can look like, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We have our traditional or hierarchical approach to media literacy that asks us to think about what information is true, what information is false, and kind of forms a hierarchy of what source credibility and questionability looks like. That's a really important skill that can help us to navigate so many of the questions that we might have around who is creating media in the first place, and it might help us to also think about questions that are being raised in an age of artificial intelligence and social media and things like that. At the Pulitzer Center, our focus tends to be a little bit more on what we refer to as critical media literacy. And critical media literacy is another type of approach to doing the same thing, where we are basically analyzing and asking questions about big questions about what what truth is, what it means to be informed, and taking a creative approach to analyzing and navigating media of all kinds. So most basically, our belief is that media literacy is just another form of an extension on literacy itself, that it is a crucial component to us being able to understand whatever texts, and texts in the broadest sense of the word, right, including visual texts and texts that we see in physical form in front of us. It's a necessary way of being able to access and to analyze those as well. So as we start to think about the different approaches to media literacy, we often start in this place of thinking about fact and fiction. So I want to ask you a question, and this time we're going to use a quick poll. So you'll see that pop up on your screen in just a moment. I want to ask you how much of the news that people in the United States encounter on a daily basis you think is disinformation. And a quick definition there, disinformation is what you might hear referred to as fake news sometimes. It's information that is fabricated content designed specifically to mislead people. So think about that for a moment. We're going to pop up a poll and would love to know what you think. I see these coming in. Thank you so much. We're at about 43% participation. If you've already voted, feel free to share more in the chat if you want to about your experiences encountering disinformation or why you've put in the number that you have. We're at 76%, and I'm going to hold about 5 more seconds for this poll. Close out in 2 and 1. All right, thank you very much. And I know we also have a whole class joining us, so I'm sorry we asked to represent you in just one vote. But let's go ahead and take a look at our results. This is interesting, and I think tells us a lot about what we're experiencing ourselves and what we're maybe seeing our students experience as well. You can see that the majority of people, or the plurality, I suppose, the plurality have told us that it's 50%. And then there's some votes for 25% and 10% as well. According to a recent study by a couple of scholars in Science Advances, which is also quoted in the book "What the Fact" that we're using as our source text for today's workshop, the answer is actually right about 1%. That's 1% of the news that people in the United States are encountering on a daily basis. And it's about 0.15% of all the media, which would include more like television and other fictional kinds of media that people are consuming as well. If that number is feeling low to you, which I think it is for everybody who voted in the room, there might be some reasons for that, right? Not all disinformation is distributed equally, right? There are times of crisis when disinformation might circulate more widely. There are topics around which disinformation might really coalesce, where we're going to see a lot more of it than we would in general. We can also get into a place with our algorithms where we're seeing a lot more disinformation than maybe some of our peers are. So this may or may not be what it actually looks like for you or for any one of your specific students. But broadly speaking, most of what we're encountering on a day-to-day basis is not specifically propaganda, disinformation, or something that was designed specifically to mislead us. Instead, what we tend to be dealing with is a much wider sea of misinformation and disinformation that can be misleading in many different and hard to pinpoint ways. So one of the things that I love about What the Fact, a book by Seema Yasmin that is for which the Pulitzer Center developed a teaching guide, and that some folks in this room may have received a copy of for this workshop. is that the first thing the book does is breaks down the many different types of misinformation and disinformation out there and helps us to pinpoint exactly what kind of misleading information we might be looking at. It's really important for us to be able to move beyond that really general umbrella and not very useful term of fake news to think about exactly how that information is being presented in a misleading way. Maybe it's an appeal to authority that is not really an authority on the issue that we're looking at. Maybe it's a kind of conspiracy theory that's been engineered to target a particular group of people. Maybe it's a fallacy of some kind. But the most difficult part of sorting through this critical media literacy landscape is to start with thinking about the different ways in which we might think about seeing misinformation pop up, so we can have questions in our mind that help us to think about the different kinds of information that might or might not be misleading, whether or not the author intended them to be that way. So we're going to spend some time in our workshop together doing a little bit of practice and looking at some examples of news framing specifically. News framing is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's something that literally all news has by nature, including the news that we find most useful. Dr. Seema Yasmin, who is a media literacy expert, she's an epidemiologist, she's a scientist, she's an author, and a medical doctor, and she describes news framing as decisions about which angle the story will be told from and whose voices it will feature, that can change the entire story and the audience's perception of the issues the story explores. This framing can often come in the form of language. We might think about the headline as a basic news frame that gives us expectations about what the story is going to be about and what the most important perspectives in this story might be. But there are many other ways that news framing can pop up as well. Let's take a look at a few of them. One is images. News framing can pop up in many different visual ways, and those visuals can be really powerful in influencing us, even if we don't make it beyond just scrolling past it. Just seeing the topic associated with that image can make a real impression. So questions that we might want to think about when we encounter those images are, what images is the author choosing to feature or create? And obviously, always, that means that we're excluding others. Do the images challenge stereotypes or reinforce them in some way? And always, you're going to see this question come back again and again. What is the impact of the choices being made here? So at a most basic level, we're trying to think about what the impact is of the fact that all of these things that we're seeing in the news are intentional and they are created by someone. They have a purpose, and it's our job both to figure out how they can be useful to us and also what their intended purpose was and how those things do or do not match up. So I want to share with you an example that has been important to us at the Pulitzer Center over the last year. This is a website called Better Images of AI. If you've heard of them before, feel free to let us know in the chat. I hadn't heard of them until one of our senior editors brought them to my attention. But basically, Better Images of AI is a website that makes an argument about the different kinds of images that tend to be associated with artificial intelligence news stories, and that they tend to be a little bit uniform in the way that they look a lot of the time. So Better Images of AI recommends that we do a quick Google search to better understand what this can look like. So I'm just going to do a quick search for AI images. And let us know in the chat. Do you feel like this is a diverse representation of artificial intelligence or a pretty uniform representation of artificial intelligence? This random Google search that you're seeing on the screen. You might be seeing some commonalities among many of these. Looks like they're from the same site, say some folks. Interesting.
I'm seeing a lot of people, Hannah, say that this representation is quite uniform or relatively uniform.
I see that, yeah, and that's my response to it as well. That is the argument that this site would like to make. And as a result of those kinds of observations that folks are making here, they have a list of recommendations that they ask news organizations, journalists, people making websites and making media in general to think about. And I wonder, Joya, could I ask you to read out some of these recommendations on the screen?
Absolutely. So a recommendation is to represent a wider range of humans and human cultures than Caucasian business person. Represent the human, social, and environmental impacts of AI systems. Reflect the realistically messy, complex, repetitive, and statistical nature of AI systems. Accurately reflect the capabilities of the technology. It is generally applied to specific tasks. It is not of human level intelligence and does not have emotions. And finally, show realistic applications of AI now, not in some unspecified science fiction future.
Thank you so much, Joya. And there are more recommendations on their website. You can check them out later if you'd like to, and think about what kinds of recommendations you would come up with if you did a quick Google search for yourself and wanted to see more of a diversity in the kinds of imagery that you were seeing. So I bring up this example as something that is relevant to the work that we do at the Pulitzer Center, because this is something that one of our senior editors who works on an artificial intelligence accountability reporting initiative at the Pulitzer Center shared with our team and shared with the journalists that she works with as a way of supporting them with being more nuanced and thoughtful about the kinds of images that they use in their own reporting. So here are a few examples of images that headline news stories published on the Pulitzer Center website in the last year. And these are all published on the Pulitzer Center website, but as a grant-giving organization, we work with lots and lots of different publications. So you can also see these were also published in The Markup, The Guardian, and the Dallas Morning News as well. And I want to ask you to take a moment with these and compare them in your mind to the kinds of images that we just saw, and let us know how well you think these images are aligning with the guidelines that you saw, and why that might be the case. So I'll put up a quick poll, but would also love to hear from you in the chat if anybody has any thoughts on things that could be done better in these images, and also things that might be helpful as kinds of diversifying mechanisms for how we visualize and think about artificial intelligence. Leaving these up for a few seconds, and I'm also going to go back to the guidelines for a moment so you can review those. In just a few seconds, I'll go back to those images so you can check those out and see how well you think they align. Got about 60% responses so far. And again, if you have voted, would love to hear from you in the chat about what we at the Pulitzer Center and what journalists could be doing better to diversify these images, and what you think is working well. Going to close out that poll in 5 seconds. Right, and I'll share those results with you here. So most people are saying that these are doing that job somewhat well, right? This is a process. It's a process to try to think about how we can do a better job of being specific about what this technology looks like, making sure that a diversity of the human impact of this issue is represented in our featured images, and also making sure that we're being accurate in the kinds of visuals that we're displaying, so that we're not thinking about imaginary futures for a journalistic purpose, but instead are thinking about what is actually happening right now. So I'd love to hear your feedback on these, but thank you so much for sharing in the chat your thoughts on that. And this is something that we're continuing to consider with not only artificial intelligence accountability, but with all of the reporting that we do. What does it look like to think about the impact of the images that we create as part of the news frame that we're presenting around different issues? So we've explored a little bit around imagery and visuals. There's also a question around the news frame presented by interviews. Who the author is quoting and citing, who is the featured voice in a story, and who might go underlooked in that news story. So this is a question that leads us to think about the power structures present in stories. One person, I think it was Hussein, told us earlier that deconstructing narratives is part of what we should think about when we think about media literacy. So these kinds of questions can ask us to think about the dominant narratives that are put forth. Who is pushing forth those dominant narratives, and who else could journalists be talking to? Could we be researching and listening to, so that we can understand what power structures are upheld and how to get other information as well? And finally, let's take a look at some numbers. This is another way that that misinformation and misleading information that might not be designed to mislead us can pop up in news. So we want to think about which numbers authors are including. When they're working with data sets, journalists are mercifully not including every number that they possibly could. They are being selective and sharing what they think is most important with us. But it's our job as the readers and as people practicing media literacy to wonder what else was included in that data set and why was this particular number chosen. There's also the question around how that number is presented. What context for it is shared? Is it being compared to something? Why was that comparison chosen, and is it useful? Could these choices minimize a problem, make it seem less important than it is, or maybe exaggerate it and be doing some work to make people more fearful than they really need to be? And finally, again, that question is always, what is the impact of the decision that these journalists are making? So I want to share just one example with you of a couple of numbers here, and I do have one final poll that I want to share with you. So I'm going to launch the poll, but give it a moment before you respond. The first number that I want to share with you is 1%. And specifically, that's 1% of the Earth's landmass surface today is considered a hot zone. It's basically inhospitable to live in due to rising temperatures right now, 1%. So take a moment with that number, sit with it, and let us know, how concerning do you think that number is? You're always welcome to share more detail in the chat if you'd like to. And I'm going to hold that for about another 7 seconds. All right, let's close that out. I'll share with you what your colleagues are thinking. All right, it's a pretty big mix here. And some folks are saying unsure. I always love an unsure answer, right? That is, unsure is a very like media literacy practice kind of answer. We're not quite sure yet. Maybe we don't have enough information to know how concerning this should be. But there's a wide range here, and I really appreciate seeing that. Thank you so much. I'm going to share a second number here with you. This is 1.53 million. 1.53 million square kilometers of the Earth's landmass surface today, right now, is a hot zone, an area of the world that is basically uninhabitable due to heat. I'm going to ask you the same question. We'll leave this open for just about 7 seconds. So I'm asking you to get your answers in fast and let us know, how concerning do you think this is? close that out in 3, in 2, in 1. And Joya, you let me know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm seeing here is that the largest difference is in that concerning category. It seems like a lot of folks went from somewhat concerning or neutral up to concerning, not so many up to very concerning yet. And I'm glad to see that actually, that we're feeling calm today, that we're not too concerned, but there is a difference in how we're feeling based on these two numbers. I mean, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And the question here is not, that it's not that we're dealing with any disinformation whatsoever. Both of these numbers are corroborated by many different scientific organizations, and both of them are the same number. But they are presented in different ways that might make us feel differently about the stories that we're exploring and the issues that are facing our world today. And these numbers come from a New York Times Magazine piece that was published a couple of years ago now, on climate migration and projections of climate for the future. It has some beautiful interactives in it. And if you'd like to learn more about these numbers, I encourage you to take a look at that story as well, which also gives you some map visualizations and some other numbers about what the future could look like as well, if action isn't taken. So we're going to spend the rest of our workshop time looking at examples of what this can look like in action. And to introduce our presenter, I'm going to turn things back over to Joya.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Yeah, so at the end of this workshop, we want you to, have programs and resources that you can use to engage in media literacy in your classrooms. But before we do that, we really want to focus on the unit plans developed by a teacher fellow in particular. Now, the teacher fellowship is an annual opportunity where educators from across the country come together to engage with journalists and create unit plans so that they can engage with reporting and practice media literacy skills in their own classrooms. Ray is a fellow of ours, and he created a beautiful unit plan today that he's going to be describing. Ray is an educator with CPS, and he's been a teacher for over 30 years. So I'm very excited to introduce him. Ray, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joya. Thank you, Hannah. I'm happy to be here and share some of the work that my students have done. I joined the fellowship last year, partly because I needed a challenge. As Joya said, I've been doing this for a little bit of time. And, we need to put ourselves back into a situation where we become learners so that we can be reminded of what it means to struggle and to create. I believe that media literacy happens most meaningfully when students create, and they become more literate when they face the challenge of creating something that can live and breathe outside of our classrooms. And so that's how I entered this. And accompanying me in that journey is my professional mission, which is to amplify student voice and making sure that students are engaged in topics and in conversations that really matter to them. So next slide, please. The problem, you can click it a couple of times. I think it's 2. Yeah. So there we go. One more time, please. There we go. So the problem I wanted to solve when I entered this is that, we know that students, teenagers write and learn in self-centered ways. We do that too, but we want to find a way to get them out of that bubble and get them to see the world in other ways. Part of this helps them realize their own bias, and bias isn't bad. I believe that. We just need to be aware of what that bias is. What I'm more concerned about as a journalism teacher, as a writing teacher, is that students are transparent about their bias and about their passion for something, or their interest or disinterest in something, because then that way we can have a conversation about how to approach this topic and be fair and be accurate. And so what I wanted to do with this unit was have students engage in questions that really help them gain an understanding of underreported stories that matter to them. And then 2, I wanted them to employ some research, writing, and storytelling skills that will help them not only with this project, but as they go on in life. And then finally, help them cultivate empathy for others, not only because of the work that they do as researchers and as writers, but also because of the work that they do as storytellers and what those stories can do for others. So next slide, please. So, and you can click all the way to the food article right there. Yep. I went through, I always believe that we should take a look at the information and figure out what the information tells us to do. And so I went through the Pulitzer directory through their bank of sources, and I pulled out a few stories that I thought might spark some interest and some conversation with my students. The first one is a good way to get them to think about beliefs, not necessarily religion, because religion stories just never turn out well at the high school level, but beliefs, stories about beliefs do. The second story gets them to think about housing. The third story got them to think about the World Cup. The World Cup was happening at the time. And so here's this other story about all the migrant workers that made all of those buildings possible and all of the deaths that went along with that. There's a beautiful story about about Black cowboys in our country. The fire story talks about safety. And then we got into food. And that's just something that students can work with. So these are the stories that I picked. And then the next slide, please. And out of those stories, we can go to 8 questions. I came up with these 8 questions, and I thought these are the questions that these stories ask us and get us to ask. So I'll give you a few seconds to just take a look at those 8 questions. And then I'll ask you to chime in the chat box if you had to pick a question to explore, if you were in a class in a learning setting and had to pick a question to explore, which question do you think you would take on? And you can just pop a number in the chat box. We got 4, we got 6, 7, 1, maybe 7. And the idea here is to, let students kind of go wherever they want to go with this, and kind of see what they can do with it. So on the next slide, we'll see a summary of the 2 types of learning products. So the first one is the formative experience. This is our practice, if you will. And so for the first assignment, students write a self-profile in written and audio version that explores one of those essential questions. They interview themselves, right? So they come up with questions, they answer their own questions. We talk about how to come up with questions that are going to get people to tell stories. And then they structure a news article that's about them, written by them, about them. And the advantage that has is that allows us to focus on structure, strictly on structure. And so we can talk about the arc in a news story. We can talk about the conflict. We can talk about leads. We can talk about endings. We can talk about how to incorporate and select quotes and break up quotes. When we get to the summative experience, this is the written and audio version of somebody else exploring the same question or a different question. Now we're talking about content. So they already know the structure, and then they create the content. So on the next slide, we'll take you to a link. And if we can click on the top link, please. That'll take us to this is the school's website where all the unit appears on my page. And so you can see all the news stories there. And if you click on the Hancock May, June 2023 issue right there. Actually, if you could go back one more. Yeah, right, that one. Yep. This is the directory, if you will. And if we scroll down to page 2, this was our May, June issue of the school paper. And I got to be honest with you, this was kind of a dream come true for me. I've been wanting to do an audio version of the school paper for a long time. And so we put this out in paper copy, but then people could scan the QR codes and they could listen to the stories. And so we're going to play a couple of minutes of what's not on your plate. So if we go back to the slides, or actually back to the Hancock page. And if we can click on, this one by Melanie Buckley, and we'll play a couple of minutes of it.
What's Not on Your Plate by Melanie Buckley. Monica was initially a cheerful child who didn't have any worries when it came to her body image and eating habits.
I think when I was younger, I was probably from the age of 5 to maybe 11, I was a very happy child. I don't know. I was really carefree. I know that I was a little snitch sometimes. I liked people being honest. I didn't like when people lied. Yeah, I guess things changed like in middle school.
She said, according to Smaller Sister 2022 by Jennifer M. Brad Bander, when children are put into situations where they feel like they don't have control, they then take it out onto themselves, like changing or controlling things that can change, like physical appearances or body image. The social circles that surrounded Monica in middle school consisted of other girls who were slim and small. Being influenced by those around her and what was considered the social norm, it pushed a negative view for Monica onto herself that she didn't have prior.
I mean, once I had gotten into middle school, I had like started noticing a lot of the girls like watching what they ate and like eating very little, and that like made me self-aware to the point where I was like sucking my stomach in and wanting to look skinny like the other little girls. But yeah, I don't know, I started watching what I ate a lot more.
Monica said, when there were loved ones noticing the harmful behavior Monica would practice, concerns would come out. There were mentions of her weight loss. It fed into her goal. Avoiding food helped give her a way to gain comments from those around her, even if it was unhealthy. Monica said,
I felt happy in a sense because it made me realize, oh, I'm doing something right. That means my body's going to look better, that I'm going to look skinnier. And a lot of people did also point that out, that I was looking skinnier. So that made me feel happy, but then I'm like, okay, I'm not eating as much. I don't really care. So I continued to like have the same habits of just not eating as much as I should.
there has been a drastic increase of pediatric patients in the hospital due to mental health issues, including doubling numbers of eating disordered patients during the COVID pandemic, according to Pediatric Mental Health Hitting Hospitals 2021 by Managed Healthcare Executives. Monica went through a lot of emotional and mental struggles when it came to her own body image, and also how her surroundings influenced her eating habits. According to Caroline Hurley in her article, How Reading the Secret Garden Helped My Eating Disorder Recovery, 2022, discusses how the media has portrayed gaining weight negatively, which
And so that gives you a glimpse into Monica's story. And I was so proud of Monica for opening up and being so brave, courageous about talking about this issue, which in our community and among teenagers, it is not talked about enough. And this really pushed the school to have that conversation and to face that conversation and to let young people here know that these issues exist. And then Melanie did a beautiful job of just researching. Melanie really cared about the story and about this issue, and she wanted to do Monica's story justice. And so she just did a beautiful job. They mix these with using Soundtrap, which is a great resource if you're looking for a sound editing system. They do have a free 30-day trial that you can use, and if not, it's super inexpensive. And kids take them. I didn't even have to show them how to use it. They just jump down there and they're like, yeah, you do this and you do this. They know how to do all this stuff these days. So you just kind of let them do their thing. And it's a really good way to get them to practice. And now, then they're practicing, reading and storytelling, which is a whole other challenge. But the kids loved it. They said that, this was something that they had not done before. And it really is a 21st century skill and experience, and they're learning to tell stories in different ways. And they're learning to be careful about how they tell people's stories. And that was my job through all of this, is just guiding them to make sure that they're compassionate in their storytelling, and that they also contextualize it, that they're gathering information from different sources, and then helping our community understand how those personal stories connect with all of these issues that are going around. So on the next slide, you see a quick summary of the unit plan, or a link to the unit plan. You can access that on the Pulitzer Center. And if you get a chance, please check out more of these stories by these Chicago students from the Southwest side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ray. Can we just have some rounds of applause in the chat for Ray and for his students who shared these beautiful stories and shared them really bravely. So I'm excited for folks to get to dig into that a little bit more. And we are always running short on time anytime we do a workshop, especially when we have an amazing group of people who are sharing such wonderful insights with us like you have been. But we do want to set aside a little bit of time if you have questions, especially for Ray, our expert educator in the room, and for Joya and me as well. So please feel free to drop into the chat any questions that you have that you would like our educators to answer today. This is also a moment when I think if you'd like to, you could raise your hand in Zoom, and we should be able to make it possible for you to come off mute and say it out loud if you'd like to.
I see a question from Kiana in the chat. I'd love to read to you. Do you have suggestions for discussing the Israel-Hamas war in the context of media literacy?
As a teacher, that's a topic that I have not taken on. I think my social studies colleagues have taken that one on, but that's not something that I've found a way to bring into my classroom at this point.
And I think we at the Pulitzer Center don't have specific programs that we're running right now that address that as a specific topic with students directly. I don't think that we have many more resources to share with you today beyond sending you a lot of like empathy and care for everyone who is doing that work in the classroom right now and navigating all of the challenging emotions of yourselves and your students who are so directly, who are, may have many different opinions and experiences and connections to that crisis. So please feel free to share with each other in the chat if there are things that you have been doing that you found are working very well for you, or if there are any resources to outside organizations that you'd like to point to as well.
Yeah, this is the generation differences and something, with parent engagement. One of the students shared her editorial. We published the editorial about an issue here at the school, and she did the audio recording, and then she had the QR code, and she showed it to her grandparents, and her grandparents were just blown away that you could get audio from a sheet of paper. They just loved it. So, this is a good opportunity to have young people can make those connections, with the other people in their family and in their community to say, look, here's this thing, and let me walk you through it. Let me show you how this stuff works.
Love that. Thank you, folks, for sharing questions. And please feel free to continue typing those in. I know Joy is about to run and support some more of our teacher fellows who are newly joining our program this year. So has a hard stop at the hour, but I am able to stay on a couple minutes more if folks have more questions. But we do just want to leave you with a couple of resources that you can return to. And whether you're thinking about specific issues that are in the headlines right now, or more general projects you might want to work on with your students, I think that these basic frameworks and questions that that Ray has posed and that critical media literacy asked us to think about whose voice is being elevated in news and what the power structures and dominant narratives might be are relevant to all of that work. So we encourage you to check out that teaching guide for What the Fact, especially this may be useful for folks who are reading the book right now as a reading guide too. There are chapter guides with discussion questions and vocabulary and things like that, but also extension activities that you can use to use the book with your students, because it is a media literacy guidebook written by a practicing journalist and scientist who understands the chemistry of how misinformation interacts with our brains as well, that is written specifically for young adults. We also have some basic introductory materials around media literacy designed for different grade levels that you can access on our partner platform, Mizzen by Mott, that are very hands-on and designed to introduce different topics that we've talked about today, which include news framing and thinking about the angle of journalism. As well as editorial judgment and what stories get attention in the first place, plus lots of other topics like bias and being curious about news, how to access it, and things like that as well. We also have resources related to that idea of making sure that students have the opportunity to go beyond analyzing and becoming creators. I think Ray's unit is a really great place to start for that work, and also gives you great examples of what it looks like for students to do this work. And we have a journalism skill builder lesson series that also opens up interview techniques, photojournalism skills, audio production, and different kinds of creative approaches to becoming media producers that can empower students too. And we encourage you to think about hosting a journalist in your classroom as well, as a way to really get the behind the scenes and get students' questions answered, demystify the journalism process, and not only learn more about particular issue areas, but understand what goes into reporting a news story so that we have in mind the kinds of questions that we can ask ourselves about the responsible process that a journalist should be following, and whether we see that evidence in the media that we're consuming. So you can reach out to the Pulitzer Center and request a journalist on most topics and in most media formats, as well as something more local to you. Just let us know, and we're happy to connect you with that as a resource. So we hope that you'll stay connected with us. Think about signing up for the Pulitzer Center's weekly education newsletter. It is the best way to stay up to date on what's happening and the new resources, programs, and opportunities that are coming out. You can schedule those virtual visits and think about other workshop opportunities you might like to connect your students with. We are also a small team, and we love to hear from you. We love your feedback and to think about new collaborations. So feel free to reach out to Joya and to me and the rest of the folks on our team to talk more at education@pulitzercenter.org. So we are going to leave things there. We are so grateful to today's sponsor for this event, the Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center, which supports and enhances global awareness and inspires informed thinking about the complexities of our world. So we hope that you'll check out the resources they provide and their expertise for K-12 and post-secondary educators, students, and really the community at large and public audiences. So also a big thank you to today's co-sponsor, the Institute of World Affairs at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And of course, thank you to all of you for being wonderful, for sharing your insights and what journalism means to you. We hope that we'll stay in touch and be part of that larger community of educators, and that you'll also share your feedback with us today. So with that, thank you. Thank you to Essie for organizing this event and being such a wonderful partner. And we will say good night. Please feel free to pop off mute for all of our speakers, and wish a final farewell to our participants today.